We then get into stage 2, which is the negotiation meeting. So this will probably happen, look, for a union that's proactive, this will probably happen about 3 months before the expiry of the agreement. And that's why I say 6 to 8 months for the planning, because 3 months you might be already negotiating, 3 months before. So once your planning is complete, if you hit that 3-month mark, you may as well reach out to the unions and say, look, we're ready to start bargaining, be on the front foot, consider the log of claims, because you will get a log of claims from the unions. They will put a bunch of things that they want in this particular enterprise agreement. Allow yourself 1 to 2 weeks to respond. Don't be in meetings responding on the fly or nodding or agreeing to things without giving proper thought. Yes, do you have a question? Or, oh, sorry, let's go. So, consider the costings associated with various things being put forward as well, because remember that it's not just the headline increase. And I've seen major mistakes in enterprise agreements that costs organisations hundreds of thousands of dollars. And that can come from, I'm just going to grab some water. That can come from naively agreeing to something that ends up in that version of the EBA and ends up staying in all sorts of versions. I'll give you a classic example of this. So I used to be in an organisation before I started this consulting business that used to have unlimited, or not unlimited, discretionary sick leave, okay, which was basically code for unlimited sick leave, essentially. So what happened, and it all sounded wonderful in theory, that that you could continue to apply for sick leave beyond most of us just get 10 days per year. In this situation, you could have discretionary sick leave that was decided by a discretionary leave group. And the discretionary leave group was 2 employer representatives and 2 employee representatives. And if it's a draw, if it's a 2-all draw on the vote, then payment continues. So you can imagine in an organisation where the workforce is almost 100% unionised, if someone's sick leave gets to, might get to a month or so and it gets referred to the discretionary leave group, I wonder if anyone can guess what the most common voting score was when they put these discretionary leave situations to a vote. It was almost 99% of the time it was 2-all. Because what happens is the 2 employees vote, continue paying, the company says stop paying, and you continue paying. We had people on sick leave in these situations, non-work related injuries, for something like 15, 18 months. Crazy stuff. You're talking an $80,000 hit on one employee in these situations. And that's what I mean by, fundamentally, major mistakes in enterprise agreements. And fortunately, the enterprise agreement we negotiated just before I left that organisation, after about a 9-month negotiation, we finally broke the back of that particular provision. It did cost us in terms of a big accrual for existing employees, but that was better than a discretionary situation. And we introduced something as well that on the 3rd 2-all vote, it would be denied. So the first and second 2-all vote, the payment would continue, and the 3rd one it would be denied. So we worked out a way of breaking the back of it. Still much more costly than the average organisation, but again, that's what I'm talking about in terms of longer lasting change, and whether they made any further inroads on that. I haven't actually checked the agreement since then, so it'd be interesting to see whether they did. But that's a classic example of how something very innocent can lead to major costs. And other things that the union will throw will be things like union training leave and things like that, and then how many employees does that apply to, how much time is that out of the workplace, and things like that. Those things can cost money. A lot of other loadings and allowances that will try and not necessarily ask for in the headline rate, but try and sneak in as allowances. Those can be very costly in organisations as well. In the construction industry, the whole, it's almost commonplace now, the whole site allowance, which is really just an allowance for nothing. It's just an allowance for turning up to work. So that's something you'll see commonly in the construction industry. Construction's an interesting one because construction, whilst none of the organisations really want to have an EBA, they kind of do it in a lot of cases to get on major projects, because not having one puts them in a position where the principal contractor starts getting pressure from the relevant unions about organisations that are working on their sites that don't have an enterprise agreement. So it's not a requirement, as some people think it's a requirement. It's not a requirement. It's a business necessity for some of the principal contractors because of the opposition they would receive from unions on these things. So, so I think the other thing, and one thing I found worked very well in my negotiations last year, is be very clear on the relevant business and economic environment. And if things are tough in COVID, make sure that you're very clear about that in the negotiations. Because one thing that's very difficult for unions to argue in enterprise agreements is that if you present the picture that the organisation's struggling, that's run a loss for this year, or it's whatever, its revenue's down, or whatever it may be, very hard for the union to argue that. And that can be a good position to enter into negotiations on. And I'm not saying that crying poor should always be the default position, but if that is the reality of the circumstances, well then that's important information to share in those negotiation meetings. Because what you don't want to create the impression is that everything's just humming along as normal and that we've got unlimited money to spend on increases or changes or new conditions in the EBA. You want to present a reality of the company's negotiation position, and that worked particularly well. And look, for organisations that are delaying dealing with their enterprise agreements, I'd say this to them, that now's actually a great time to be negotiating EBA. It's probably the best time, I would say, in the last almost 20 years, because you've got the COVID, I don't want to say the COVID excuse, but the COVID situation that certainly has impacted on businesses one way or another. A number of businesses have entered into temporary or short-term, financial difficulties as a result of that. Some of them more long-term, of course. And you can negotiate a 4-year deal, which might be based on your financial difficulties, which might only be 1 year of problems. So negotiating now is actually if you're ever thinking about doing an EBA for the first time, or you're dealing with one that's expired or something like that, now is actually a good time to be dealing with it. Don't wait till the end of COVID. You wait till the end of COVID, well then you're going to get bigger demands. You're going to get, why would I have my reduced demands if I'm a union? If the COVID situation's blown over, why would I ask for less at the end of COVID than during COVID? So it doesn't make sense to do that. Provide a response to that log of claims by way of presentation. So what I would normally do in the negotiation meetings is run through each of the union's proposals and tell them why we can or can't accommodate them. And some we will and some we won't. It's a negotiation ultimately.